Yes, Luigi, it's happening again. No, Luigi, I don't think you could do better. Yes, Luigi, I am aware that you're dead. Okay. November 16th, 1940. There are several nations with big naval interests in and around the Mediterranean Sea, two prominent ones being Britain and Italy, and this week, one of them tries to knock out the other with new tactics and a sneak attack. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Italy's invasion of Greece had turned strongly in favor of the Greeks, and the Italians were on the defensive. The British were fighting the Italians in Africa, and the Free French took control of French Equatorial Africa. There was also a lot of action at sea in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean, it was a string of British operations under the group name Operation MB8. That continues this week with its main element, Operation Judgment. This is also known as the Battle of Taranto on the night of the 11th and 12th of November. The British send some 24 swordfish planes from the aircraft carrier Illustrious 400 kilometers off the Italian coast in the Ionian Sea to attack Italian ships at port with aerial torpedoes. The battleships Littorio, Caio Duilio, and Conte di Cavour take significant damage. Two cruisers are hit as well, but importantly, just like that, half the Italian battleship fleet is disabled, and the value of the aircraft carrier as a floating base established. Winston Churchill says this has shifted the balance in the Mediterranean. Admiral Cunningham, in charge of Britain's Mediterranean fleet, says that this shows once and for all that, in the fleet air arm, the Navy has its most devastating weapon. Well, also that night, 4 Italian merchant ships are sunk by the British in the Strait of Otranto. The Italians are having other setbacks against the British this week elsewhere. On the 11th, Italian bombers, protected by biplane fighters, attack Harwich. They lose 6 planes and the RAF loses none. Actually, Martin Gilbert writes that of 25 Axis aircraft shot down that day over Britain, 13 are Italian bombers. And King George writes in his diary, "The Italians fell very quickly out of the sky. I will try not to be vindictive, but this news has pleased me." But things are not all that rosy for the British, though. That same day, the steamer Automedon comes under fire from the German raider Atlantis in the Indian Ocean. During the attack, the Automedon's captain, many officers, and much of the crew are killed. Consequently, when the Germans board the ship, they find on the bridge a bag that has been sealed and weighted to be thrown overboard and sunk in case of emergency. That bag is full of secret British documents, including the Merchant Navy Codebook, but also the opinions of the chiefs of staff that in the event of a war with Japan, Britain would not be able to hold Hong Kong, Singapore, or Malaya. This is rushed to the German embassy in Japan and then radioed to Berlin. So not only is it a coup for German intelligence, but a big sign to the Japanese about British vulnerability in East Asia. And the Japanese are also very much interested in the success of the Battle of Taranto, the aerial attack on a trapped fleet at port from carriers far off the coast. All of this gives Japanese inspiration straight off the bat. The successful use of aerial torpedoes was noted at once in Tokyo, where Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander-in-chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, saw a means of eliminating America's power at sea by striking at Pearl Harbor at a fleet at anchor, as Britain had done. This was Operation Z. From the day after Taranto, its planning was given priority above all other naval projects. That might be a Japanese priority, but Britain's priority is the continuing attacks by the German Luftwaffe. On the 14th comes a heavy bombing raid on Coventry involving 449 planes. 27 war factories are hit, and a firestorm begins, burning out most of the city center. 60,000 of 75,000 buildings are badly damaged or destroyed. 568 people are killed, 400 of them too badly burned to identify. They are buried in a communal grave. Some historians have since suggested that, by a combination of scientific and cryptographic intelligence, the British authorities were able to take precautions against this raid, but they did not do so in order to protect their sources. This is not the case. Warning had been received during the afternoon of the 14th, and the few precautions possible at this short notice have been taken by the relevant authorities. On the 16th, in reprisal for Coventry, the RAF bombs Berlin, Hamburg, Bremen, and other German cities. But the British bomb Germany regularly, of course, and they do so even during Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov's visit to Berlin this week. On the 12th, Molotov meets Adolf Hitler and German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop. They discuss the New World Order. Molotov is interested in Finland, Bulgaria, Romania, the Dardanelles, and the Bosporus, but Hitler talks more about broad spears of worldwide influence for the Axis powers plus the USSR. As John Keegan points out about Hitler's future plans. By November 11th, it was clear that only if Molotov came bearing guarantees of Russia's acquiescence in Hitler's mastery of the continent could Hitler be deterred from mobilizing for the Eastern Offensive. Well, Molotov is not in such a mood. Despite the obvious power of the German armies and their string of success, he still expects Germany to strictly adhere to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of last year, and he also demands knowledge of German intentions concerning third parties. In future meetings with Hitler, he will continue to insist on this. Molotov also wants to revise the 1936 Montreux Treaty for better rights of passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. He has a final talk with Ribbentrop the 13th. This takes place in Ribbentrop's air raid shelter during an RAF bombing attack. They actually have to break off dinner at the Soviet embassy to go to Ribbentrop's shelter. Molotov says that Soviet interest in the Baltic does not stop with Finland, but they are concerned about Swedish neutrality, and also with who will control the Baltic exit to the North Sea, and that is Germany's home waters. Ribbentrop tells him, not for the first time, that the USSR is free to expand south towards the Indian Ocean and should focus on that. They could dismember the British Empire, whose defeat is a foregone conclusion. Molotov asks, why then are they in an air raid shelter, and whose bombs are they hiding from? Next morning, Molotov left for Moscow. Although he had been in Berlin only 48 hours, his visit had lasted long enough to convince Hitler that the final struggle with Bolshevism, which had been a leitmotif of his political creed since the earliest days of his struggle, could not now be deferred. I'm going to jump ahead and quote Hitler from the future about Molotov. He demanded that we give him military bases on Danish soil on the outlets to the North Sea. He had already staked a claim to them. He demanded Constantinople, Romania, Bulgaria, and Finland. And we are supposed to be the victors. It is true that to Ribbentrop, Molotov says the USSR could never give up its interest in the Kattegat and Skagerrak, which have been under German control since May. This really helps convince Hitler that continued adherence to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is only going to cause him more and more difficulties. Something else here about the idea of attacking the Soviet Union. On November 13th, when Goering warned that the German Air Force might not have the strength to destroy Russia's industrial power, Hitler told him that the long-term needs of the war against Britain meant that German control of the Caucasus oil fields was essential. The war against Russia could be won in a few months. Goering should prepare his air forces to begin it May the 1st. That is not all Hitler is preparing this week either, for on the 12th comes Führer Directive number 18. This is the plan I talked about last month to move on Gibraltar, though it also includes possibilities for the Canary Islands, Madeira, and Spanish Morocco in an attempt to drive the British from the Western Mediterranean. The directive specifically states, political measures to induce the prompt entry of Spain into the war have been initiated. As for the war in the field this week, that is being fought between the Greeks and the Italians. On the 13th, the Battle of Pindus ends with a Greek victory. On the 14th, Greek 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps drive most of the Italian 9th Army back into Albania in the new Greek counteroffensive. So successful is it in its first few days that at Menton, France, just beyond the Italian border, posters dotted the town that read, "This is French territory, Greeks. Do not advance further." And here are some notes to end the week. On the 13th, negotiations finished between Japan and the Dutch East Indies. Japan will receive 1.8 million tons of oil per year. On the 14th, the new British Commander-in-Chief for the Far East, Air Marshal Brooke Popham, arrives in Singapore. On the 15th, the Warsaw Ghetto is cordoned off from the rest of the city. And the week ends with the Italians on the run from the Greeks, being heard in the skies over Britain, and having their naval power seriously compromised by the British in the Mediterranean. The Japanese, though, are not the only ones taking note of the possibilities that the Battle of Taranto have opened up. Frank Knox, American Secretary of the Navy, writes, "The success of the British aerial attack against ships at anchor suggests that precautionary measures be taken immediately to protect Pearl Harbor against surprise attack in the event that war should break out between the United States and Japan. The greater danger will come from aerial torpedoing." If you'd like to see the history of the Russian sphere of interest, you can check out our Between Two Wars episode about just that right here in a sec. Our patron of the week is Manuel Nascimento. Thanks to his support and that of many others, we are able to keep this show running. So do like Manuel and support us via patreon.com or directly at timeghost.tv. Subscribe, share, ring that bell. See you next time.